Long ago, in the peaceful village of Kawalo, nestled deep within the hills of Nabiri, lived a gentle man named Obika. He was quiet, full of strength, and loved with every corner of his heart. From boyhood, Obika had watched his father honor his mother with kindness and care, and he made a silent vow to one day treat his own wife with the same fierce devotion. Tari, on the other hand, was a cheerful soul from the bustling town of Mapura. She was the youngest of 4 daughters, and her aging parents both retired. School teachers had poured their wisdom and warmth into raising their girls right. Obika and Tari crossed paths at a wedding. He was the best man, she the radiant bridesmaid. Under the warm village sun, amidst drums and dancing, their paths intertwined. What began as friendly chatter that day grew into late-night stories, shared laughter, and deep understanding. A year passed, and one breezy evening, Obika knelt down in the red dust, holding out a simple ring, his eyes filled with hope. Tari laughed, tears flowing down her cheeks, and said yes before the words could even leave his lips. Their wedding soon followed. A colorful celebration under the wide Nabiri sky, filled with ululations, dancing feet, and the sweet scent of jollof rice and grilled tilapia. It was without doubt the happiest day of their lives. In the early days of marriage, joy bloomed like hibiscus in the rainy season. They rented a cozy 2-room home on the edge of Mapura. Obika worked as a site supervisor with a local construction firm, while Tari sewed fine kaftans and dresses from their home corner shop. Money was tight, yes, but their love? Richer than gold. Their bond was more than marital. It was a friendship woven in trust and laughter. Then one dawn, Tari called Obika into their tiny living room. She sat him down with a shy smile and handed him a small box wrapped in palm leaf. Inside, nestled on soft cloth, were tiny beaded baby sandals. Obika furrowed his brow in confusion until Tari whispered, "We are going to have a child." The words hit him like thunder in a dry sky, shocking and beautiful. He burst out laughing, then crying, then dropped to his knees right there on the woven mat, praising the heavens, his voice trembling. He wrapped her in his arms and held her so tight she giggled between her tears. Their hearts were full at last. They would become 3. The pregnancy was smooth as river water. Obika guarded Tari like a fragile calabash. He went with her to every clinic visit, massaged her tired feet under the moonlight, and even rose at odd hours to prepare smoked fish stew when she craved it. Finally, after a long stormy night of labor, Tari brought forth a strong, wailing baby boy. Obika, eyes full of wonder, held his son in trembling arms and kissed Tari's forehead. "Thank you," he whispered. "You've made me a father." They named him Zuberi, for he was strength wrapped in swaddling cloth, a true blessing from the gods. When they returned home, cradling their newborn, Obika began to notice something unsettling. Tari had grown quiet, like a drum with its skin loosened. She barely spoke, and when he sat beside her, she shifted away gently. At first, he didn't worry. The old men in Kiwalo often said that new mothers needed time to rest, to recover, to find themselves again, so he gave her space. He held baby Zuberi through the nights, lulling him to sleep with hums from his mother's village songs. He cooked millet porridge, swept the compound, and did all he could to let Tari rest. He believed, truly, that she would soon return to him with her laughter and warmth. But days turned to weeks. Weeks grew into silent months. Tari remained distant, her eyes always far away, like she was staring at something only she could see. She answered his questions with soft nods or single words. She no longer smiled. At night, she curled at the edge of the bed, turned away, her back a wall he could not climb. Sometimes he would find her by the window, staring into the night, as though expecting the guest that never came. Obika missed her deeply. He missed their evening talks over roasted groundnuts. He missed how she'd lie on his chest, drawing circles with her fingers as they listened to the village radio. Most of all, he missed her laugh, a sound that once made their little home feel like the sun had moved inside. Still, he held on to Patience. She had grown a whole human inside her. She had labored in pain and bled to bring Nabiri forth. Maybe. Her body was exhausted, and her spirit too. One quiet evening, after singing Nabiri to sleep, Obika sat beside her. The radio hummed low, but neither of them heard it. He reached out and held her hand. Her fingers were cold, stiff. She didn't pull away, but she didn't squeeze back either. He cleared his throat. "Tari, are you all right?" Without turning to him, she nodded. "I'm fine." He gently pressed her fingers. "Please talk to me. I miss you." She finally looked at him. Her eyes were heavy. "I'm just tired. Motherhood. It's harder than I thought." He pulled her close. "I'm here. We'll do this together. Please don't shut me out." That night, for the first time in many moons, he slept with hope blooming in his chest. But nothing changed. Tari continued to slip further away. She turned her head from his kisses. When he reached out, she recoiled like touched by fire. At night, when he tried to hold her, she would quietly leave the bed, saying she needed to be near Nabiri's room. Obika's heart broke in silence. So one morning, he decided enough was enough. Maybe it was something medical, something unseen. Gently, he persuaded her to go with him to the health center. She agreed without protest. Though her face showed no spark, doctors ran tests. They drew blood, asked questions, examined her body. At the end of it all, the doctor smiled gently and said, "She is fine. There is nothing wrong." "There is nothing wrong with her body," the healer had said softly. "She only needs rest, good food, and love." Obika nodded in thanks, but inside, he was more lost than ever. If there was no sickness in her body, then what was this thick wall that had grown between them? A few days later, he suggested something he had read about in an old booklet, a kind of spiritual or emotional healing, meant for women who carried invisible sadness after giving birth. They called it a heaviness of the heart, a fog that blocked love. But when he mentioned it to Tari, she flared up like fire touching dry grass. "I am not cursed," she snapped. "There is nothing wrong with me. Stop trying to fix me." Obika stood in silence, holding his breath like a child caught in a storm. He apologized and reached for her hand, but she had already turned her back. So he chose patience, believing that if he could not reach her with words, he would wait for her to find her way back to him with time. But time, it seemed, only carried her further away. 9 months passed, and Obika buried his loneliness deep. Inside, to neighbors and friends, he smiled and laughed as always, but when he returned home, he felt like a tree in dry season, standing tall but dying quietly. The nights were the worst. Lying beside her, hearing her soft breathing, feeling her warmth just inches away, but knowing he couldn't touch her, those were the hours he wept into his pillow, whispering silent prayers to the sky. He begged for her to return to him, but the silence in their home grew louder than any words he could say. And he had no one to tell. In Kewalo, men didn't talk about such things. Men didn't cry over love lost or cold marriages. They smiled in public and bled in private. So Obika carried his sorrow alone, hoping each morning that the Tari he married would awaken again with her smile and her laughter. But time did not care about heartbreak. It marched forward, dragging Obika with it. With each sunrise, the loneliness deepened, and it seemed Tari was building a fortress around her heart that no one could enter. One night, after another silent rejection, Obika found himself alone in the kitchen, staring at a glass of water as if it held answers. He wasn't perfect, but he hadn't asked for much, only for his wife to return to him. Was that too much? It had been 2 full years without intimacy, without a touch or a whisper of passion. 2 years of lying next to a stranger who wore his wife's face. Then came the Friday that changed everything. It had been a terrible day. His boss had shouted at him. His car had broken down under the sun, and when he got home, The house was as cold as ever. Something inside him cracked. He needed to breathe, just for an hour to feel like himself again. He grabbed his keys and left without a word. He drove through the town of Nabiri until the warm lights of a palm wine tavern caught his eye. Drums were beating, people were dancing, shouting, living. After 2 years of quiet suffering, the noise felt strangely comforting. He parked and entered, sat in a corner, and ordered palm wine. He wasn't looking for a woman. He wasn't even looking for joy. He just wanted to drown the ache in something stronger than tears. The drinks helped. As he sipped his 4th cup, a young woman in a yellow dress caught his eye. She smiled boldly. Her name was Nayana. He shook his head when she approached. He was married, and despite the pain, he loved his wife. But Nayana was gentle and clever. She didn't flirt. She simply talked and made him laugh, touched his arm softly, and told silly stories. Something inside Obika, something that had been tightly locked, broke open. What happened that night wasn't planned. It wasn't even wanted. It just happened. The next morning, he woke in a strange bed beside Nayana and felt his soul collapse. What had he done? He dressed quietly and left without a word. The drive home was filled with shame so thick he could hardly breathe. He wanted to undo it, to rip the memory from his chest, but what is done cannot be undone. He swore it would never happen again. He would carry the guilt in silence, buried deep where no one could see it. And that's what he did. But each day after felt like a punishment. He couldn't even look at Tari without feeling like he was covered in dirt. At night, as she turned her back to him, he wanted to scream, to confess, to beg. But what would he say? Forgive me, I betrayed you. Because you wouldn't touch me. No excuse could wash the filth from his soul. So he said nothing. He swallowed the guilt like bitter herbs, hoping the taste would fade, but Tari never asked. She remained locked in her own world. If she had questioned him, even once, maybe he would have broken down and told her everything. But her silence gave him permission to keep hiding. And so 3 long months passed, carrying his guilt like a sack of stones strapped to his back. Obika tried to live as though nothing had changed, but just when he thought time had dulled the edges of his sin, strange things began to unfold, starting with a scratchy throat that refused to heal. At first, he blamed the dusty winds of Harmattan. Everyone in Nabiri was coughing or sneezing under the dry air. But while others recovered, Obika only worsened. His throat burned like coal, his muscles ached, and his body grew weak despite long nights of rest. Tiny cuts on his skin refused to close, and fevers would rise and fall like angry waves. One day, after coughing so hard he nearly collapsed, Obika dragged himself to the village clinic. The tests were swift, but the doctor's return was slow, and when he came in, his face held a weight Obika had never seen before. "Obika," he said carefully, "we found something in your blood. You are HIV positive." For a long moment, the room became silent, though the doctor's mouth kept moving words of treatment, hope, medicine, but Obika heard none of it. All he could hear was the echo of that cursed night. Nayana's laughter, her perfume, her touch, and the single act of betrayal that had now poisoned his blood. He stumbled out of the room like a man drunk on grief and sat in his car, numb and breathless for what felt like hours. How had he come to this? How had a man who once held love so purely in his heart now become the carrier of something so devastating? He thought of Nabiri, of Tari, of the life he had longed for, and he wept. He wept loud and hard, chest shaking, tears soaking through his shirt. But all the crying in the world could not undo the damage. The choice before him was cruel. Should he confess and risk shattering everything left? Or should he carry this cross in silence, protecting what little remained? That night, he crept into bed beside Tari and didn't close his eyes once. As the hours dragged, Obika decided he would die with the secret. He would stay away from her, not out of anger, but to shield her from what now lived inside him. She wasn't even seeking intimacy, so maybe this distance was a kind of mercy. The pills the doctor gave him became his secret companions. He hid them beneath the bed, swallowing them in the bathroom with shaking hands, alone. They kept his body standing, but his spirit was unraveling thread by thread. Slowly, he stopped reaching for Tari. He no longer hoped for her touch or prayed for her warmth to return. He had poison in his blood. How could he offer that to the woman he once swore to protect? But Tari noticed. She noticed how he no longer whispered her name or rested his hand on her back in the mornings. She noticed how he now lay stiffly at the far edge of their bed, as if her skin might burn him. At first, she seemed to welcome the space. But as the days passed, she began to miss him, truly miss him. Not knowing how to bridge the silence, she began with small touches. Her fingers brushed his as she handed him a calabash of water. Her head leaned briefly on his shoulder when they sat together. Her hands adjusted the buttons of his shirt or smoothed imaginary wrinkles on his sleeve. Obika felt each gesture like a blade pressing against his guilt. He wanted to take her into his arms, to bury his face in her neck and say, "I missed you every day." But the truth chained his arms. He was no longer the man she had married. He was a broken husk hiding darkness inside. Then one night, everything shifted. Zuberi had fallen asleep early, and the house was bathed in soft quiet. Tari freshened up, lit a sweet vanilla-scented candle she had bought from the market, and sat beside Obika on the sofa closer than she had in years. The television buzzed with empty noise, but Obika wasn't watching. Tari looked at him with eyes softer than dawn and leaned in without a word. She kissed him gently. Obika froze, his body stiff, heart pounding. Every part of him begged to hold her, to erase the pain, to forgive, to forget, but fear kept his hands locked in his lap. Tari didn't pull away. She cupped his face, whispering, "Obika, I'm ready now. I'm sorry I kept pushing you away." Tears burned behind his eyes. He wanted to scream, to tell her the truth, to beg for her forgiveness. But instead, he let her kiss him. And so, after nearly 3 long years of silence and separation, Obika and Tari finally became one again. But what should have been a moment of healing felt to Obika like a knife through his soul. While Tari slept soundly, in his arms for the first time in years, her breath warm against his skin, Obika lay staring into the darkness, eyes wide, heart heavy. He felt like a thief stealing joy he no longer deserved. Then a cruel thought crossed his mind. Perhaps this is justice. Perhaps this is her punishment for locking me out for so long. He hated himself for thinking it, but pain distorts even the kindest hearts. From that night onward, Tari changed. She smiled again, laughed with ease, and began to kiss Obika at the door each morning like the old days. But inside, Obika's chest was hollow because he knew what he carried, the silent storm growing in his blood, and he feared it was only a matter of time before it raged through the walls of their home. Months later, Tari began falling ill. It started with fevers, exhaustion, and cold sweats in the night. She brushed it off, blaming it on stress and sleeplessness, but Obika knew. He knew before the doctor spoke, because the guilt had been whispering it to him all along. The day she went for tests, he paced the floor like a condemned man awaiting his fate. When Tari returned from the hospital, her hands trembled as she held the paper, and her face was pale as ash. "Obika," she said, her voice hollow, "I have HIV." The world spun. Obika sat down slowly, the air sucked from his lungs. Tari stood trembling, her eyes wide in disbelief. "How?" she whispered. "I've only ever been with you, only you." Her voice cracked with anguish, and Obika's heart shattered into pieces. He opened his mouth, but his voice came out broken. "I'm sorry, Tari, it was me. I made a mistake." Tari stumbled backward like she had been struck. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes burning. "You did this to me? Why, Obika? Why?" He wanted to shout to explain how lonely he had been, how cold and silent their house had become, how he had cried and pleaded with the heavens before falling into one terrible night. But what good were excuses now? What was done was done. So he wept in silence as Tari dropped to her knees on the cold floor, sobbing uncontrollably. She didn't sleep that night. She sat on the floor, knees to her chest, her back pressed against the wall, her eyes wide open but seeing nothing. Dried. Tears stained her cheeks in thin white lines. She wanted to hate him. She wanted to throw plates, smash glass, even set fire to everything they had built. But something heavier than rage pressed down on her chest. Fear. Fear of Zuberi's future. Fear of the life that now looked like a long dark tunnel. She had kept herself pure, faithful, believing that marriage was a shield from the world's evil. But that shield had shattered, and the person she trusted most had become the very sword that cut her. At dawn, without a word, Tari rose from the cold floor, packed a small bag, lifted Zuberi into her arms, and left. Obika didn't stop her. He watched her go, though it felt like his soul was leaving with her. She took a taxi to her parents' home, and when her mother opened the door and saw her daughter's swollen eyes and shaking hands, she gasped and pulled her close. "Tari, what is it? What's happened?" And Tari collapsed into her mother's arms, weeping harder than ever before. Her father came in from the backyard, his face lined with worry. It took almost an hour before Tari could speak. When she finally did, she poured out the entire story. Her parents listened in shocked silence. Her mother wept quietly while her father rose slowly, his voice low and steady. "Obika did this to you?" Tari nodded. "He cheated. He brought me this sickness." She nodded again, eyes wet with betrayal. For a long while, no one spoke. Tari expected her father to explode, to promise vengeance, to drag Obika before the elders and demand justice, but instead, he let out a long, tired sigh. He looked at her, eyes filled with sorrow. "My daughter," he said, "we warned you." Tari's brows drew together. "Warned me? About what?" Her mother gently spoke next. "When Obika came to us to ask for your hand, do you remember? What we said? We told you marriage is not a bed of roses. We told you that when the storm comes, you must fight for your home. But this," Tari cried, her voice rising, "this is not a storm. This is destruction. He infected me. He ruined everything." Her father's face hardened. "Tari, for 2 whole years, Obika came to me without raising his voice. He didn't want to shame you. He came quietly, saying you had shut him out, treated him like a stranger in his own house." Tari's mouth dropped open, stunned. "We tried to talk to you," her mother added gently. "But you told us you were fine. You said you didn't need help." Tari shook her head in disbelief. "I was lost. I was tired." "And so was your husband," her father replied sadly. "But instead of finding healing within his home, he found death outside of it. Still, you were the one who closed the door first." Tari collapsed into her mother's lap, crying like a child again. She wanted to shout, to scream that it wasn't her fault, that Obika should have been stronger, that betrayal could never be justified. But inside her heart, a quiet voice whispered, "You shut him out." And when a man stands outside too long, sometimes he falls. Her father didn't stop there. "Marriage is not only for bright days. You vowed for better or worse. This is your worse. Thank the heavens you have a child many do not. And if death is where this journey ends, at least you won't walk alone. The couple who shares this sickness must now share the path, even to the end." Her mother wrapped her arms around her, weeping softly. But her father turned away and walked off, disappointment in every step. Tari sat there, hollow and heavy. She had come home expecting rescue, hoping her parents would rage and free her from this pain. Instead, They had handed her back the same burden she'd carried in. She was a wife, she had made a vow. And now she must carry it. Her heart felt like a broken pot, cracked, leaking, but still trying to hold something inside. After hours of silent tears, she wiped her face and made a choice. She would return to Obika, not out of joy, not out of forgiveness, but because marriage is not built only on happiness. It is built on endurance, on survival, on carrying the cross, even when your shoulders bleed. 3 days later, Tari returned to their home. Obika was sitting outside on the steps, eyes sunken with sorrow. When he saw her, he stood slowly. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Once, they had shared everything: dreams, laughter, secrets. Now they stood like strangers, the weight of pain thick between them. Tari spoke first. "Let's go inside." Obika stepped aside. He followed her in like a man walking toward judgment. She placed Zuberi gently in his bed and tucked him in, then turned to face Obika. He couldn't look at her. His eyes stayed on the floor like a guilty child. "I haven't forgotten," Tari said softly, "and I'm not done being angry. But I came back because marriage is for better and for worse." Obika tried to speak, but no words came, only tears. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered, voice cracking. "I am so sorry." Tari didn't move. She just stared at the man who had broken her heart, the man she had once loved more than life itself. For a moment, hatred bubbled in her chest. She hated how small he looked now, how love had brought her this much suffering. But she also hated what she had built, the cold silence, the nights she turned away, the years she let pass untouched. Marriage was not a path lined with flowers. Often it was muddy, bruised, filled with falling and forgiveness. It was two broken souls trying to hold hands in the dark. Slowly, Tari knelt beside Obika. She took his trembling hands, leaned her forehead against his, and together they cried. They cried for the years they had lost, for the betrayal, for the love that had burned to ash, and for the little boy sleeping in the next room, still innocent, unaware of the cracks in the walls of his home. The next morning, they went to the clinic side by side. Together, they began treatment. Together, they swallowed the bitter pills. But healing was no fairy tale. Some days, Tari couldn't look at Obika without the fire returning to her chest. And some nights, Obika woke trembling, haunted by the weight of what he had done. Still, they stayed. They rose each day and built something out of the broken pieces, stitched together by stubborn love and bitter forgiveness. Because they knew. Now, broken people could still build beautiful things, even with scars, even while carrying crosses too heavy to bear alone. And in their quiet home, with bottles of medicine lining the shelf, they didn't live happily ever after. But they lived side by side until the very end.